Merry Christmas, guys. Welcome back. Today we're doing a little bit of work on the Zero because sadly the MK still isn't here. It didn't make it to Santa's sleigh, and so we don't have a new car for Christmas. It'll get here eventually. I haven't heard any word one way or the other, and I figured it was probably shaky with all of the craziness around the holidays anyhow, so until further notice, it's just hurry up and wait. While that's somewhere out in the ether, we got to work on what's right in front of us, and today, that's the Zero. Specifically, we're revisiting, not really a hack, but something that I adapted with the help of a friend for smog purposes that might be hindering us right now. Let me show you. So here on the Zero, if we look, these are the old injector ports. We didn't end up using these. In fact, for the GBS build, there's usually a plug. What we had done, because you have to have a functional PCV, positive crankcase ventilation, which has to have a check valve in it, and it has to vent either the valve cover or the block back into the intake, but behind the butterflies. And the easiest way I found to do that, since we're running ITBs, is to utilize the existing fuel injection ports. Now, we had used a 3D printed plastic and that failed, and so we had them reprinted in a material like this kind of thermoplastic that's used for valve covers, some intakes, etc. And that seemed to hold up for a while, but it started presenting weird issues that we didn't really catch until my friend Sean removed his plugs and then put in the blanking plugs, and then his car wouldn't idle, which tells us that these might be leaking, or that plastic has deformed enough that it's no longer sealing. And I've noticed similar problems when trying to adjust my idle screws, balance the throttle bodies. And right now, like, everything's fully closed and it idles at about 1,000 RPM, which shouldn't be happening. So chances are likely that either A, these are leaking, or B, there's a leak somewhere else in the intake system. And as a result, I also find lean popping under throttle. So there's a high likelihood that all these things are related, and it's a leak somewhere in our intake. On the bench, we have our pieces here. So there's no O-rings currently installed, but this is the part that we had printed. It's the same or similar thermoplastic. It's just got a fitting that'll go up into the hose. This part drops down into the head. And that's all it is. It's just meant to be a vent line. What I did is I took the factory GBS plugs, and to make them easier to remove, I put a little M5 thread in there so that we can just quickly yank these back out of the head when we need to in the future. And the plan today is we're going to get these puppies installed and then check and see if our idle changes. Let me open the door to the garage, we'll wheel the car out, and we'll do a little before and after. It is a brisk 56 degrees outside, thus my beanie. But we're going to give the car a cold start and let it warm up a little bit, and then we can compare the idle. So normally it would sit and idle here at about 1,000 RPM when it's cold, and then it would drop down a little bit to 900 or so. But right now, it'll just sit here at about 1,000 RPM, even when it's warm. And like I said, our idle adjustments are fully closed. So now before that gets too warm, we're going to shut that off, and now we're going to pull these plugs out and put the new plugs in. Now I don't see any kind of like obvious signs of melting, but there is discoloration either from emissions, oil, vapor, whatever from inside the motor, or reversion coming back up through the intake. But what we're going to do is we're going to carefully pull off these O-ring seals and put them onto our new aluminum ones. And then easily enough, just pop these O-rings onto the new aluminum plugs. And then just to make them seal or slide in a little bit easier, I'm just going to give them a little dab of oil, which should help kind of wet the O-rings again. And that'll just make it easier to slide home back into the head. All right, we have our plugs. Let's go put these back in the car. So the next step, we have our line here, and what we want to do is, since we have blocked off the ports temporarily, we're just going to go all the way up there to the source, and we're going to pull the line up there, which is a -8, and we're just going to put a cap on that. Okay, ideally we would remove all the extra lines, and I would have a filter on that instead of just a cap. But for now, we're just testing. Let's go ahead and start up the car and see if it will even idle. Well, just barely. Looks like we got a little bit of balancing to do. So while this runs, let's pull it apart and break out the balancer. All right, so now that we've got everything rebalanced, it was pretty obvious that there was a leak. Turning the car on, I think it was idling at about 500 RPM. So there was definitely a leak up in either the area of the plugs or just where the hoses were attached to those adapters. So eliminating this line, just again as a troubleshooting process, that's where our leak was. Now, since that was a leak and we've solved it, what we had to do is rebalance the ITBs. I don't really see much of this anywhere on YouTube. I see a lot of people installing ITBs, but no one really talks about what you do past that. And just like the carburetors of old, you have to balance an ITB so that each individual throttle body is letting the same amount of air into the engine, which is what this guy is. This is an airflow meter. It's just a simple gauge that measures how much air is going into this intake, just this trumpet, which is why you have to do one by one all the way across to try and get them to balance. But you're chasing your tail a little bit. So for each of these throttle bodies, you have a bypass screw, so you can trim each one individually, but we actually have two sets of ITBs. We have the rear set and the front set, and you adjust these also individually, I should say in sets of two, because there's a set screw here which adjusts the opening of these two throttle bodies together, and then this set screw here which adjusts the idle for all four ITBs. And so you want to, again, you end up chasing your tail a little bit like I mentioned, but you want to try and get everything balanced and get your idle set roughly where you want it to be. Once that's done, start measuring the first two and then the last two. Again, this is your rough measurement. If it's clear that the last two, I should say the secondary, we'll call these the primary, since this is the first one after our actual throttle cable. And then this is our secondary, which is driven by the primary. So once you set this one, then you're going to go and measure the second set or the secondaries, and you're going to adjust this screw to get it close. I was measuring 3 kilograms per hour on the primary set, and then when I checked the secondary set, what I was seeing was about 2.5. So I needed to adjust this screw to open basically this throttle shaft, or both throttle bodies, just a hair, like only a little bit, to get that extra half a kilogram per hour. And then once that was done, then I could begin balancing across these top individual trims to square everything up and together, and to set our final idle limit with our idle set screw here. Now that that's all done, I'm going to put the filter element back on and we'll take the car for a spin. Well, a drive sounded like a good idea until it absolutely started pissing oil out of the front of the engine. I don't know if that's because we suddenly had positive crankcase pressure because we blocked all the breathers, or if there was an existing problem that I hadn't noticed until just now when adjusting that idle in the driveway. But I've already cleaned up the mess, but yeah, it left a pretty big spot after only a few minutes of idling, and it slung oil all over the place. In fact, you can see it over there on the passenger side fender. It's going to be hard to see in there with the nose cone in place, but there is oil just everywhere, even after I wiped it down, and no obvious place that it's leaking from at first glance. It's somewhere around the belt drive system because it is slinging oil all over the place. So I'm tempted to say front cover or around the front cover or something like that. In fact, the front cover is wet just right there. I don't know if it comes up on camera, but yeah, I can see wet spots all the way up here. And again, I don't know if that's because it's being flung up there or if that's where it's actively leaking from, but I'm going to have to inspect that, which means diving into the valve cover, front cover, pan, all that good stuff, which is kind of a pain. So something to look forward to for the next video. So 2 steps forward, 1 step back, but this is what car development looks like. Fixing one thing and then finding other problems, lather, rinse, and repeat. But as I've mentioned before, I want to have this car be flawless. Even though I'll be selling it on, I really want to have a good, solid car to pass on to someone that's problem-free so they can enjoy it just as much as I'll be enjoying the new build. So it is what it is. We'll get it fixed. We'll see what the problem was, diagnose it, and then get it resolved. So we'll have to take a rain check on that drive. But for now, I'm confident that that intake leak is solved. For now, though, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year's, Happy Holidays. I hope all the best for you and yours, and here's to an even better 2024. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the New Year's.